Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
This is September 9th, 2020, and we're up to episode 91 of Transmission.
Whew, we're rocking.
It's getting good.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the category of funny day names, today is Buy a Priest a Beer Day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for today, you can consider us your priests and you could buy us beer. I'm sure there's like Beer of the Month Club or,
Yeah, and just for the record, theologically, I don't really believe that there's a clergy that's distinct from the rest of the body of Christ, except for today, strangely enough.
Strangely enough.
Just something about me that woke up. I felt like, I woke up high church today, and I don't.
I know.
Maybe if my Catholic or other high church friends want to send me a beer, maybe it'll stick. We'll see.
There you go. Yeah. Ooh, and look, CK, you've got a new nickname.
Good morning, Dan and Pumpkin Blaze. Pumpkin Blaze would be a.
That would be good.
I would accept that.
That would actually be a great band name.
Pumpkin Blaze. They only play on Halloween gigs. Maybe some Harvest.
No, or all fall. Yeah, they play all fall. Pumpkin Blaze.
Minnesota is pretty lengthy. Anyways, speaking of, changing from pleasant things, spice and beer, we decided, I know that this Kyle Rittenhouse thing is, I cannot say his name without being very dramatic about it. But it's just
yeah. We could do this entire episode in a bad Arnold accent.
Like Austrian German accent. Yeah, I know this happened a while ago, but this is still an ongoing thing. And as tensions continue to grow with protests and fascist presidents seeking re-election, this Kyle Rittenhouse dude seems to kind of occupy this symbolic space in our collective imagination. And so it's worth talking about not him just as the case, like who did what and what's the reality. Was he defending himself or was he a cold-blooded murderer? Talking about how he is formed, like what is it about our society that can create a Kyle Rittenhouse, and how much of a pandemic of racism is it? And maybe we'll talk a little bit about the specifics of his case, but this is a bigger question.
But first we should introduce ourselves.
Sure.
Our non-band names.
I'm Mark Pumpkin Blaze Van Steenwyck, director of the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
Yeah. And I'm Daniel Walpert, and I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. And
together we are Pumpkin Blaze and the Spices.
There you go.
You're the Spices, Dan. Because you bring the heat.
I bring the heat. Yes. Yes, we will bring the pumpkin spice.
I am just for sake of integrity. I am drinking my first Starbucks, which I'm very anti-capitalist, but there's a Starbucks that I can drive through nearby. It's pumpkin spice.
Of course.
You can even see. I don't know if you'll be able to see. It says pumpkin latte on there. It's proof.
Yeah, it does backwards.
Yeah, this isn't just. I'm not pretending here.
This isn't theoretical. For you, pumpkin spice is your religion.
The spice must flow. Anyways,
so you're the high priest of spice.
An apostle, really. Anti pumpkin spice. Kathleen says, "Hey." As I've pointed out to others, you can hate the spice, but the spice loves you. It's okay.
All right, so moving on. Here's the basic theme for today, as far as I'm concerned. White people do not understand how racist they are. That's the theme. And one of the things that's fun to do every once in a while, I do this for different things. You just Google under images, nice white people screaming at black people, and you get these incredible pictures, right? And particularly the ones in the in the 50s were great because you get these women in these, bouffant 50s hairdos looking all nice, obviously all made up and got their nice little blouses on or their little sweaters. And, their faces are contorted in this racist rage, right? Because their school is getting integrated or, their bus is getting integrated or something is happening where Black people are involved and Black people are getting rights. And these are all the nice citizens of the 1950s and 60s in the Midwest. And, this is Kyle's mom or grandmother, but closer to mom. And we hide behind this idea of the nice white person. But then as soon as the nice white person gets poked, and we have a whole situation we could mention, but maybe we're not going to.
Yeah, we're not going to bring up the Christian left.
Things just get really ugly. And this is important to look at in a very deep kind of way.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to underscore something here that if we're listening and we think, oh, this Kyle Rittenhouse is a bad guy, which I'm not arguing he's a good guy, but it's easy to be like, oh, those are the shitty kind of white people, but thankfully I'm one of the good ones. Mm-hmm. Now, here's part of the problem with this way of thinking. So what happens in our society isn't just that there's these people who hate Black people and then they try to enforce anti-Black laws. There is that, but there's also a lot of people, and I think every white person has this sort of white cop inside of them at some level, who is policing the situation and says, look, I support these people, but we got to have law and order. And so when they disrupt proper law and order, whatever that is, like maybe if I'm a progressive, my law and order is more flexible and kind than the law and order of a conservative. But I have this sort of like idea of like what's proper. Right. And if Black protesters and their supporters cross that line, and then we decide that we and those who think like us should stifle it and crush it because they've crossed the line, that's white supremacy, no matter where the line is at. Because at some point you have to allow the community who's upset to have a say in what law and order is supposed to look like, or what a proper society should look like. And so in that moment, if we get feeling threatened, we reach for the Black people who we know happen to agree with us and where our line is at. That doesn't absolve you of that white supremacist logic either. So with this Kyle Rittenhouse, very white nationalist, worse than your typical like progressive, nice white liberal who still has a line. But still, the one way of looking at it is that his threshold of what is unacceptable was just further away from ours, but we might have one too. So I think it's important to recognize, yes, that's worse, just like Trump is worse than Bush, but there's still like an overarching logic here that we need to interrogate instead of just scapegoating the 17-year-old as somehow just as he's the cancer rather than he's the pus-filled boil that comes from a deeper disease.
Right. Well, and we really see this in all these situations that actually have nothing to do with law and order, right? So where you're talking about this line, you're inferring and talking about, protests and but this line, right? So, this list of what happens to Black people, what they get the police called on them for, right? So walking in a neighborhood while Black, jogging while Black, drinking pumpkin spice coffee in the wrong place while Black.
Trying to deposit a check that you got in an anti-discrimination lawsuit, and then the bank thinking that you're trying to cash a check illegally and calling the police on you.
Right.
So
this group of women in Napa who were on a wine tour train.
That's the whitest.
Which is the whitest thing ever. And it was a group of Black women and, they were being too loud. So they got kicked off the train. right? And so this line is not just about law and order, right? It's about this whole civility idea, right?
Yes,
Which goes all the way back to the civilized versus uncivilized, right? White people are civilized, black people are uncivilized savages. And yeah, and as you're saying, this line of what is an okay way to behave, and that white people have the right to police that, that's racism. That's white supremacy right there.
I think it's helpful to reframe it. Law and order is the structural way that we enforce things, but that exists to kind of like protect this idea of civility and politeness that often ends up dominating. Like somehow politeness is more important than kindness. We don't even know what kindness is, so we police politeness, right? We don't know what justice looks like, so we police civility, which is about tone and posture. And usually when you start talking about, am I being respected enough? There's going to be like power imbalances sneak their way into any question of who's getting the appropriate amount of respect. That's why police officers kill people, is because they're not feeling respected. For some reason, police officers don't feel disrespected by folks like Kyle Rittenhouse.
No.
So they don't kill them.
Or by the guy in Bloomington that shot many rounds at police officers after he had murdered a couple of people, and he managed to be arrested alive. And I bet you can guess what color his skin was.
Couple comments here coming in. From Gus. Punk band
Gus, this is just like off the rail.
I have not heard of them. I'm assuming that where this is going is a song of theirs. Only played during the summer because lead singer was an elementary teacher. How would you feel if your kid's new teacher spent previous months singing "They Saved Hitler's Cock"? I want to listen to that song now, just because I'm curious.
Yeah, you could probably ask Alexa to play it. I'd feel fine about my kid's teacher singing that, especially if I could, go to school without coronavirus.
Yeah.
Then I wouldn't care. No.
Kathleen writes, I always thought I was not racist until I started working on my family's genealogy, and it suddenly occurred to me that some of my friends of color couldn't go back more than a couple of generations. It was a little thing, but it made me wonder how else my life was easier just because I was white. CK writes, my wife got fired from her job recently because she spoke up about the racism she saw and was told by her white male boss he felt insulted by her reverse racism.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this is something that you see all the time, right? In work situations. And this is one of the reasons that, I'm glad there's been more and more conversation and emphasis about the fact that most of the activism that has to happen is not, on the street, on Facebook, all of this, that actually the majority of it is in work situations, right? Because that story is one that I've heard dozens and dozens of times, right? And just as another whole class of examples, right? Progressive seminaries, right? Progressive mainline seminaries have an incredibly hard time keeping Black faculty because they hire a new Black faculty person, and as soon as that person makes any comment that is out of line or too loud or too much of a push, fired, their position gets eliminated, the environment becomes so toxic that they have to leave, right? And again, these are all, right, the nice white people, and this is why I find these pictures really helpful. It is the one picture is worth 1,000 words, right? When you look at these white men and women, and you can imagine them in their churches, in their stores, in their schools, in the PTA, all this, and you look at the disgusting looks on their faces, you realize, like, okay, this is something that is a formational thing that is lurking deep within white people, within all of us. and that until we, get in and work with that and recognize that, we just grow little Kyle Rittenhouses, the next generation. I mean, to me, Kyle is a victim of this. He's a 17-year-old kid. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. He has no clue about life and reality and anything else. He's been formed this way. So it's the fault of the generations before him that have created him. And that's what the issue is. Just
to kind of pivot to the wider, more. So for some reason, like only people who comment via YouTube are like kind of trolls. So here's one guy, Obi-Wan. I see what you're doing there with your username. Free Kyle. Now, this is the thing. Our society does not generally agree that what Kyle Rittenhouse did was particularly bad. There's tons of people that are not even fringe that are, societally speaking, are kind of huddled closer to the middle of the bell curve of public opinion in the United States of America, who think, he was doing his best. You have like people on Fox News saying, well, when the cops don't do their job, it makes sense that people would feel like they need to step in. You had President Trump retweet or like a tweet where someone said something kind about Kyle Rittenhouse. He's refusing to condemn him. And part of it is there is this sense, this plays into the larger narrative right now, that all these protests are being caused by socialists, Marxists, black racists, black supremacists, anti-American types who represent most of the things that are bad about our society. Trans people, queer people, like these are a collective of people who are anti what America's supposed to be about. And so when you have this 17-year-old, misguided though he may be, trying to police and stop these villains, well, no one else is stopping them. And so that's how a lot of people think about this. And they don't even realize, they don't even think in terms of it being racist or not. They're not even aware of it.
Well, I mean, Michelle Bachmann said yesterday that, trans black Marxists are trying to take over America. And that's what the Democrats are about. And, and one of the things, I mean, a friend and colleague of mine on Facebook, a black woman, posted the other day after, Trump was talking about eliminating anti-racism training in the federal government because it was un-American. Posted, said, look, and we mentioned this, I think, a couple of days ago. She said, we do have to recognize that actually anti-racism training is un-American in the sense that America is founded on the premise of racism. And so, this is one of the problems that the political parties and powers that be have, right? Is that if the Democratic Party gets up there and says, yes, we're un-American, and that becomes a soundbite, they never get elected again. And so it becomes this very bizarre dance when we cannot name that, we actually, those of us who are interested in justice and social transformation, we actually want a different America. We do not want a racist America. We do not want a white supremacist America. And so we want to undo that America and create a different America. And all of these white folks, that they sort of get that. I mean, they get that at a certain level. Like, I want to be in charge as a white person. I want white supremacist America. And I feel really threatened by this stuff that's going on, And so, I'm going to throw all this negative stuff on the political wall and see what sticks, with the hope of continuing to have white supremacist America. That's a very hard conversation to have in any kind of coherent way.
It is very hard, and it's partly, pretty far to the left, So I get it, but it bugs me when garden variety liberals, I see this interaction a lot. You get conservatives saying, "Oh, Marxist trans black people taking over America, socialism, communism, blah, blah. And then nice garden variety liberals step in and it's like, well, we don't want socialism. We don't want any of these things. I agree with you that we need to basically, we just need to tweak some things. And I'm sitting over here like having lemonade with Che Guevara and Karl Marx. And I'm like, what? Why do you always have to throw anyone further than the left of you under the bus in some sort of to cling to some sort of fictive middle? And this is, you're exactly right. Like the founders of the organization Black Lives Matter are Marxist or Marxist adjacent. A lot of the organizers on the streets in every major city where there's protests happening, there's a coalition. There's some neoliberals out there, but there's a lot of us lefties. So they're right. Like, and I would not be unhappy at all if the country got taken over by trans black Marxists. I would see that as an amazing win. Like, so
well, and the reason that we've gotten, Joe Biden as the Democratic candidate that, so many of us feel like we have to vote for, because otherwise we are actually going to elect, Hitler Jr. for round 2 here, is because the DNC organized to throw the entire left under the bus. And, with the hope of actually getting moderate Republicans to vote for Biden, and that's how they think they're going to win. All right, Bobby's got a question.
How come Kyle Rittenhouse type guys don't sign up for real police work, like Narcotics Division, Gang Task Force, ATF, Organized Crime? I feel like some of them do.
Well, actually, a lot of them do, Bobby. And there's an enormous issue right now around the fact that police and police unions have a lot of connections with white supremacist groups. And actually, driving up to, I'm up north right now, but so bring the beer over here to our retreat center, by the way. Right
Northwest.
Buy a priest a beer day.
Go northwest until you can't go further northwest in Minnesota, and that's where Dan is.
So I heard this fascinating interview by this Lebanese American FBI agent, ex-FBI agent, who has written this great book about basically how the whole torture program didn't work at all, and pretty much destroyed the war on terror, actually. And the last part of the interview was all about the rise of white supremacist groups and how basically they're exactly like the Taliban, and they're exactly like Al-Qaeda. And the stuff he was talking about was wild. I mean, they are going to the Ukraine to train their, they have these camps there. There's this whole international kind of cabal of these folks. And he said, basically they are the white Christian Taliban. And so when you see a bunch of them riding around in their pickup trucks with machine guns, and you think, haven't I seen this somewhere before? Yeah, you have. It's all those pictures of Al-Qaeda riding around in pickup trucks with machine guns. It's the same thing. Apparently, some of them are even using Al-Qaeda training manuals, which is pretty wild. All right.
Kathleen writes, white supremacy brought in dark-skinned persons as slaves. Now they can't have slaves. They want all of the non-whites to leave. Well, and then leaving in one of two ways. Like this is where the cultural piece comes in, because it's either leave this country or you have to conform to our standards of Western culture. And so this is where a lot of pundits are white supremacists, but they will deny it because what they are, but they won't deny being white culture or Western civilizational supremacists, which is kind of functionally the same. Like if you're enslaving groups of people or taking other people's lands, but you expect indigenous and other POC folks to conform to your society in order to fit in, like that's still functional white supremacy, like saying you have to do things the European way.
Well, and the other thing is that actually we still do have slaves, and it's called the prison industrial complex. And, one of the most amazing to me statistics is that the number of Black people under supervision by the prison industrial complex, i.e. either in prison, on probation, on parole, right now in America is exactly the same as the number of black folks that were enslaved at the beginning of the Civil War. Mm-hmm. So it was 4 million then, it's 4 million now. And, these folks work for all kinds of, companies. They work as firefighters in California. They basically are enslaved. They get out. Most places they can't vote. They can't get jobs. They cycle right back into the prison system. So yeah, it's very much still a part of our society.
Yeah, and then that's not even talking about the larger ways that Black folks and poor folks are controlled economically. Mm-hmm. Something that could be at least compared to something almost feudal, like at least. Colin writes, Rittenhouse was 1 year shy of having a badge and qualified immunity. It seemed like he was on his way to become a police officer for sure. Yeah. Everything indicates that's what his goal was. And he wouldn't have had any problem getting into that.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure if he somehow is declared innocent, which is a possibility, he probably will still become a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
Gus writes, Kyle was in a bunch of want to be a police officer when I grew up groups. He would have been even less accountable if he had a badge in 5 years. CK writes, it seems like you have these basement-dwelling, gun-toting white militia kid supporters towing the thin blue line. Reminds me, like, I grew up a lot among this. Like, in rural Minnesota, there are lots of militia groups. Some more formal than others. Lots of people. I'd go to lots of friends' houses, apartments, trailer homes, and there'd be Confederate flags on the wall, even though we're in Minnesota, which is as far north as you can get in the continental United States, lower 48 anyways. It's this idea of celebrating kind of badass police kind of thing and seeing urban lifestyle as the enemy is pretty common. It's just a very common thing. Yeah. So this is, again, this kid is maybe a little bit more aggressive in terms of actually bringing a gun to a protest. But the logic is not unusual.
No, it's not unusual at all.
It's not uncommon at all. And it's it's an idea I would have been sympathetic to him. Like I'm sympathetic to him in the vague sense of a life wasted now. Like since I'm an abolitionist, I don't like it when people say, oh, he should go to jail for the rest of his life. I'm like, well, there's probably better ways. We can't just say there's better ways for other people, but now for him, he gets an exception. But that's as far as my sympathy goes. But like when I was young, I would have thought of him as maybe a qualified hero. Like I totally would have, because my logic was the same, that Western civilization is under attack, that Judeo-Christian values is what makes this country great, that I'm not a racist, but white culture is better than black culture. I would have thought all of those things vehemently and would have seen them as worth defending. And I was not an extremist. I was normal in my setting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
John writes, there's little evidence that Kyle is now disqualified from a career in U.S. American law enforcement. Yeah, he would only be disqualified maybe if he was convicted of a felony, right? Like, I don't know how it all works.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would imagine that would bar him, but you're right. Like if he just gets a slap on the wrist or something, he could become a cop. Patricia writes, in my district 6-7A, John Thompson, House candidate who's black, is getting thrown under the bus for losing his cool. I mean, he kind of gained his cool a little bit to me, but at the Kroll protest in Hugo, I've worked with him on our community council, and he is so oriented to love and unity, but unity requires equality, doesn't it? It does.
Yeah, so that's a great example, Patricia, of what we're talking about. And, you can look up the video of his speech. It was filmed on Facebook Live and stuff. And
John Thompson, Hugo, or John Thompson protest.
And look, he went off. There's no question about it. He went off.
Letting it rip. Yeah.
Personally, I thought it was great, and I thought that it was a very frank, very unadulterated And yeah, it was not polite. It was not a white speech.
It was not civil.
And he's being completely excoriated, actually far more than Kyle Rittenhouse is, by a lot of people, for saying stuff. And all he did was say stuff. And so that's a great juxtaposing those two people and looking at how the white middle deals with those two people is a great example, object lesson of exactly what we're talking about.
Quotes around losing is cool. I inferred that, but thanks for telling that.
Yeah.
I assumed that. Colin writes, if we want to talk about his formation, let's not forget it was his mom who drove him up there and served as a getaway driver after the cops declined to arrest him. Yeah, it wasn't like my little baby just wandered up there and got into mischief. It was all very intentional and thoughtful. Like, we're going to go and be part of an armed presence to protect property and our way of life. And that's not really, to me, this is going to push it maybe for some of you, but I don't see a whole lot of difference between people driving up to police this themselves and scared white liberals calling the cops on protesters. Like,
no,
it's whether or not, if you're using a weapon or if you're like eliciting mercenaries to use the weapon towards the same end, quelling dissent, you're kind of the same to me. So like, this is why I will not allow this story to be an example that liberals use of like how horrible the further right is. Like, if they're not willing to say, look, this is actually an example of how toxic our system is, a system that we are invested in maintaining.
Yeah.
We got to look at ourselves. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we're at time. Just want to mention that tomorrow we're having a guest. Alan Ewing Merrill was actually on transmission back in the early days.
Remember those days?
Episode like 20 or 25 or something.
We were so naive then.
I know. And he directs the BTS Center in Maine, and they are having a fall convocation online that's all about climate change. We got a bunch of really awesome people that are going to be talking, and he's coming on tomorrow to talk more about it. And so definitely join in. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll see you all tomorrow.